everybody, I am Joe Tobiason, wedding and nonprofit photographer based in Seattle, Washington. And before I dive into the video, I do want to point out, like, obviously things look different here than all the other videos I've made in the past. We moved and I'm now in my new office space that we're going to build into more of a studio office and stuff, which would be cool. So I'm sure I'll make more videos about that in the future. So before COVID hit, we went to Palm Springs on a little mini long weekend vacation with some friends while we were there. I was shooting my Yashica T4 and Erika, my partner, was shooting the Olympus Stylus, the Neo 1. And inside of those cameras, I was shooting Kodak ColorPlus 200 and Erika was shooting Fuji Superia 200 in a way that we could try to compare those films just a little bit to see what they look like. I mean, obviously they're different cameras, so they're not going to be a perfect comparison. And then while we were doing that, we also each shot one roll at box speed and one roll at overexposed by a stop. So the 200 film, we shot it at 100 film. So we could see kind of the way that these two films are going to operate. So as we look through those are kind of like the 4 different scenarios to compare the different film stocks. So let's start by diving into the Fujifilm C200 film. So we're gonna start that, and this first photo here is one of me and Lena, and I'm gonna start off by showing the stuff that was overexposed. So one thing I do really appreciate this is you can see here how well burned in those shadows are into our faces. So as Palm Springs being super sunny all the time, what I was really hoping to use this while I wanted to overexpose it was a way to kind of lift those shadows to burn those in a little bit. But with the nature of film, it shouldn't then lose too much highlight detail as long as it's scanned in a correct way. So you can kind of dive back in. So this is a lot more of that same C200, C200, Superia 200, same thing, different names. And so you can see more of that shadow kind of burned in there. I would say one characteristic of the Superia that I found is that it's a pretty solid, a lot of magenta. And you can definitely go back in and pull that back out and kind of change it. But consistently, at least with the way that I scan things with and then translate for them through Negative Lab Pro, that's just the nature I was getting a lot of it. So here's one we shot at box speed on the C200. So you can see there's a little bit more contrast in there. It is pretty pretty bright here in the highlights, and then like my black jeans that are really dark, and it's kind of the nature of that more contrasty stuff. It definitely can see the vignetting coming. When we look at all of these photos here, these are all the Fuji C200 but shot at box speed. You can just see how much more contrast exists in all of those photos, but they do really balance nicely. And I do like this photo here of Lena and Erika sitting in the back of the car. I do like that when exposed for the shadow, how that pulls out. Similar also this one of Jess and Lena here on the right, and then we can get in here. But this is one that you can start. I try to do a couple comparison photos here. So on the left is at 100, so it's overexposed, and then on the right is the accurately exposed at 200. And you can really see those magenta tones in both of them, but it really shows up a lot in the shadows, which is an issue when you shoot at box speeds. You're going to have those stronger shadows because you're not burning them in quite as much, and so it's becoming really pretty prominent here, and I'm not a super fan of it. Again, I know I could fix that using Negative Lab Pro, and probably if I had a professional scanner, it would, or if I sent it off to a lab, somebody else would do it a little bit differently. But you can just see a lot of that magentaness in there. So it's another one of those overexposed. But then you can come in here and we're going to compare these two photos here. On the left side, that's an overexposed photo, and the right is a correctly exposed. And there's a couple things that are interesting in here. On the left, you do see a lot more of that magenta in the shadow tones here that are being lifted up, whereas in the right, they're just getting crunched into being black. So maybe that's a stylistic change or something you'd have to be able to edit for to plan for. So here's another one that you can see on the left is the photo that was done at the overexposed, and then on the right is an accurately exposed. And you can see how much more punchy that contrast is, like how much more fall off there is. Honestly, it looks like there's more even contrast in our faces. And man, my face looks really pink as compared to kind of that washed out. I don't know. It's quite interesting. So we're going to slide on over to the ColorPlus 2, which was shot with the other camera. You can see here, so this is one that I took of Erika and Lena, again, using the overexposed, and immediately you can see the skin tones I find a lot more natural. Like, I mean, she's a white baby, so she has a little bit of pinkness to her skin tones, but it's not quite that like really strong magenta. I'm gonna slide into here. So this is another set of ColorPlus overexposed by a stop, hoping to burn in those shadows just a little bit, and I think it does do that quite nicely. Again, if you're looking for film for a family vacation, which both of these films are pretty inexpensive, this is the kind of stuff you'd be using, and I'm immediately way more impressed by the color rendering on here. Now, again, different cameras, so maybe the Yashica is just, I mean, the Yashica is just a nicer camera, but I find that a lot more appealing in there. So then here's one we're shooting him at box speed of the ColorPlus 200, and you can immediately see, just like I said before, you can see how much with the other film, but how much more contrasty this is. So with this being like an on like lit scene, like just how much more not just contrasty, but how much more saturation is coming into this frame. So this is a whole set here of all those photos, and again, way more punchy, way more contrasty, but still kind of maintaining more of the yellow tones in the skins, rather kind of those yellow orangey rather than the magenta ones. And now I'm going to go and do some more of those side-by-sides like I did before with the C100. And so on the left is an overexposed image, whereas on the right is a correctly exposed. So here on the left, you can see this photo of Lena, and her face is in the shadows, but it actually balances out pretty nicely. You can still see it because it's lifted, and because it's filmed, that overexposed area on either Lena's shoulder or Erika's shoulder can get kind of pulled back in the scan. Whereas this photo of Erika sitting in the pool, it's a lot more contrasty there on the side of her face. And I think if Erika was not looking into the sun here, like that photo probably wouldn't have worked. One thing that really also played in, I think more so with the ColorPlus than with the Superia, was the sky colors. And so when overexposed, I feel like the Kodak really pushed the sky more into a teal color, whereas when it was correctly exposed, it was very much a blue color. And so that's another thing just to keep in mind, like stylistically. So if you're going out on a family vacation and you want that sky to have a very blue feel, then probably more thinking of it in the box speed would be what you're going for. Whereas if you want kind of more of the vintage tealy feel, then maybe overexposing might be something that's more to your liking. And again, we're going to go through and we can have these two photos that are comparison. You can look into comparing the shadows in like a mixed light scene. And so here on the left is one where you can still see the Airbnb back there, and you can see in the shadows pretty well. You can see some like even grass detail underneath Lena's shadow. You can see this other photo, and I believe these were taken at about the same time of day, especially just like judging by the length of the shadows and stuff. But you can see how much more contrast is in the scene, how much deeper the shadows of here on the dirt, the shadows underneath the car, and like it doesn't look like they're losing shadow detail, but if it was something you cared about that you actually wanted to see, it would be really hard to pull it out. So let's go through and let's do a little bit of head-to-head between the two films, which I think is kind of the whole point of why we wanted to make a video like this. So I'm going to take this, and this is some in the pool photos, which again, you're on vacation, you want to see what it looks like in a pool. So we can see the 4 different looks here, starting here on the left with the C200 overexposed, correctly exposed, and then the ColorPlus overexposed and correctly exposed. And yeah, this one of Lena here, I really do like how that looks with her overexposed just a little bit. But again, you can really see that magenta tones. I honestly, and just like the more I do it, I hate the look, at least in this bright setting of what that ColorPlus does, how red it makes the skin tones look and how unnatural. But also you do see like those deeper pool tones, which do look kind of cool. I do really like how blue that is and how contrast it is. So it's kind of a balance of things. Whereas over here, you can see here, I feel like both are much more neutral skin tones. So you can see here these 4 different photos and comparing when you use a flash, how they're going to play out. And it definitely really on both the Fujifilm and the ColorPlus, when you shoot them at 100, it definitely helps kind of fill in those shadows just a little bit. When you look at the photo on the top left, the one of me and Lena that Erika took, just how much more that bar behind is kind of burned in. Now obviously like it is lights directly behind, so it does kind of help fill those in. But if you compare that to the contrast of the photo below, which I think also kind of exacerbates like the pink tones, and then also the brightness of the flash on our faces. and I don't know, just I enjoy that a lot more. Compare that to on the other side, I think that the shadows are a little bit less pronounced. It also, again, might be camera differences in the way that the flashes are rendered. We can go in and kind of do some more head-to-head. So this is both the two different films shot at 100 in kind of mixed dappled light. You can see on the left here, actually really on both of them, the shadow colors are pulled in pretty nicely. It definitely helps deal with that contrast. I think the photo on the left is probably exposed just a touch darker than the one on the right, so it does look a little bit different. But you can really see that magenta tone versus kind of more of that like yellowish tones in between the two photos. I pulled up both cameras and I was taking photos of the two cameras in exactly the same spot, just to see how they would render. And again, it's just like all magenta tone versus that warm light. It does look like these shadows here in the Kodak are a little bit bluer, but both in pretty strong shadows, in pretty strong contrast, do look pretty good here overexposed. I really do like that. Here's some ones of both of them exposed at box speed. Slightly different scenes, I guess. This one here on the left is more shooting out of the shadow, whereas this is shooting into the shadow. And so the ColorPlus does look a lot more contrasty. It also might just be that with the amount of shadow in this, that it's being scanned slightly different or done slightly different Lightroom. I think one thing interesting to note is you do again see that when shot at box speed, how much blue tones you find in the sky with ColorPlus. Because that is just blue, 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 whereas these are more kind of a light dappled. I think this is one of the Fujis that looks best shot at box speed, just because you are shooting from inside the shadows, then it's exposing correctly for those, and then blowing out the highlights looks really good. Whereas honestly, I'm not super stoked about this here in the ColorPlus. I feel like it still is trying to add too much contrast into the palm trees there. I don't know, it just doesn't, I'm not as fond of it. And that's the end of my comparisons for now. I don't think that there's a right or wrong. Personally, I think when I continue to shoot the C200, the Fujifilm, I will pretty exclusively overexpose it by a stop, just because I feel that if you're in any sort of a contrasty situation, it looks really good when it's lit for the shadows, but it just looks real bad when it's super contrasty and those are dark, and it just pulls out way more of those magenta tones, and I'm just not a fan of it. So when I use this more, I will be overexposing it every time. The ColorPlus, I kind of liked it both ways. I feel like I still probably also will overexpose it by a stop because of the balance it allows for of lifting shadows and stuff. And I don't know, as much as it's cool to see how dark blue the sky was, I don't necessarily love that look, so I don't know if I'll go for that either. So I think both of them I'm going to end up overexposing, but I do really appreciate the process of being able to look back at them and see the exact differences. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you enjoyed this comparison video. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and if you've seen similar experiences using these two films in the past, or if your results are completely different. And I would love to continue this conversation. On the outro, I'm just going to leave you with a bunch of other random photos I took on this trip. I also brought a Ricoh half frame, an auto, and then also my Mamiya 6. And so I just some favorite photos. I'm just going to end with those, but thank you for watching. Have a great day.